Have you ever heard of someone accidentally building a multi-million-dollar company while trying to solve a problem for themselves? Not a carefully planned startup with pitch decks and investor meetings and a 5-year roadmap, just a person who had a simple problem, built a simple solution, and then watched in disbelief as thousands of other people said, "Wait, I need that too." That's the story of Derek Sivers and CD Baby, one of the largest online distributors of independent music in the world. And in his book, Anything You Want, Derek shares the lessons he learned along the way, not as a polished business guru, but as a thoughtful, honest friend who figured things out the hard way and wants to save you some time. What makes this book extraordinary among the thousands of business books out there is what it refuses to do. It won't promise you a system for making millions. It won't give you a 10-step formula for disrupting your industry. It won't tell you to hustle harder or wake up at 4 in the morning. Instead, it asks you something far more valuable. What do you actually want? Not what you're supposed to want, not what your parents expect, not what the startup culture says you should chase. What do you, specifically, honestly, deeply want from your work and your life? And then it shows you how to build something around that answer, whatever it may be. The story begins in 1998. Derek Sivers was a working musician who simply wanted to sell his CD online. He approached several companies and was turned away every time. Independent musicians weren't worth the trouble, they said. So he built a small website for himself. Nothing fancy, just a way to process credit cards and ship CDs. He solved his own problem. Then a friend asked if he could sell his music through Derek's site too. Derek said sure. Then more friends asked. Then strangers. Then hundreds of musicians. And without ever intending to, Derek found himself running a real company. That moment, the moment a personal solution becomes a public service, carries the first and perhaps most important lesson in the entire book. The best businesses don't start from ambition or greed or a desire for fame. They start from a genuine problem that a real person is experiencing, a problem that turns out to be shared by many others who are quietly suffering through the same thing. When your motivation is rooted in solving something real, you move differently. You don't stop at the first obstacle because you're not trying to prove something to the world. You're trying to fix something that genuinely bothers you. That difference in fuel, real need versus abstract ambition, changes everything about how you build, how you persist, and how you treat the people you're building for. This naturally leads to one of the central questions Derek asks throughout the book, a question that sounds deceptively simple but cuts to the core of everything. What do you want? Not in a vague aspirational sense, but with real precision. Do you want to build a massive empire that employs thousands of people? Do you want a quiet, sustainable life where you do meaningful work and have enough money to live comfortably? Do you want to change the lives of millions? Or do you just want freedom, the ability to control your time, choose your projects, and answer to no one? All of these are legitimate answers. The problem, Derek says, is that most people start building without being clear on their answer, and then find themselves, years later, trapped inside something that gives them everything except what they actually wanted. After this foundation, Derek makes a point that feels almost radical in the age of venture capital and startup mythology. You don't need investors. You don't need bank loans or accelerators or pitch competitions. What you need is one paying customer, one person who gives you money in exchange for something valuable. If you can find that one customer, you've already proven the core idea. And if you can't find that one customer, no investor in the world will save you from the fundamental problem that nobody wants what you're selling. This philosophy of self-funded growth shaped every decision Derek made at CD Baby. He never took a single loan or investment throughout the company's entire existence. Every expansion, every new feature, every new employee was funded by the profits the company generated itself. This constraint,
which might seem limiting on the surface, was actually enormously freeing. He never had to satisfy a board or hit quarterly targets or compromise his values to keep investors happy. Every decision could be made based on one simple question: is this good for the musicians who use our service? That clarity of purpose, unclouded by the competing pressures of outside capital, is something most businesses never experience. But what does growth look like without investors? Here, Derek offers a perspective that challenges one of the most deeply embedded assumptions in modern business culture. He says, growth is not a goal. Growth is a tool, a means, not an end. The end is serving your customers better. If growth helps you do that, then pursue it. If growth takes you further from the essence of what you're doing and the people you're serving, then growth is actually harmful. This idea feels almost heretical in a culture that measures success primarily by scale. How many employees do you have? What's your valuation? How many countries are you in? Derek quietly insists that maybe success is doing what you love for people you care about in a way that lets you live how you want, regardless of how big or small the whole thing is.
One of the most memorable and instructive passages in the book comes from a seemingly ordinary customer service interaction. An angry musician called to complain that his order had been delayed. Derek apologized, made it right, sent the order for free. Simple enough. But after the call ended, Derek didn't just move on. He sat and asked himself, why did this delay happen in the first place? He traced the problem back to a flaw in a process. He fixed it. Then he asked, how do I make sure this never happens again? He wrote a clear, documented procedure. This small sequence of events, problem, resolution, documented system, became the template for how he ran the entire company. The lesson he extracts is this: every customer complaint is a gift, not an annoyance, not a burden, but a free, specific piece of intelligence about something in your business that isn't working the way it should. And every problem you solve should become a documented system so that you never have to solve it again from scratch. Great companies aren't the ones that never make mistakes. They're the ones that treat mistakes as valuable data and build structures that learn from them. A new employee who joins a year later should benefit from every hard lesson you learned in year one without having to live through those lessons themselves. This systems thinking orientation led Derek to one of his most important realizations about the role of a founder inside their own company. In the beginning, you are the company. You write the code, answer customer emails, pack the orders, take the calls. This is not just necessary, it's actually valuable because it gives you an intimate, ground-level understanding of every part of your business. But if you stay in that mode forever, you don't have a company. You have a job that didn't bother asking your permission before hiring you. The long-term goal is to build a business that runs without you, a business that has systems and teams capable of operating at full capacity whether you're present or not.
Getting there isn't simply a matter of hiring people and delegating tasks. There's a real craft to building a team and transferring authority without losing the soul and values of what you've built. Derek describes a period when he realized he was spending most of his time answering the same questions from his employees over and over again. How do we handle this customer situation? What do we do in this case? Can I issue a refund here? Every time he answered, he was aware that the same question would come back again because the answer existed only in his head, not in any written form anyone else could access. His solution was elegant in its simplicity. He decided that every time someone asked him a question, instead of just answering, he would also write down the question and his answer in an internal document. Over time, these documents accumulated into a comprehensive company manual, a guide for handling virtually every situation employees might encounter. Once that manual existed, he could tell his team, "Before you bring anything to me, check the manual first." And more importantly, he could leave the company for weeks at a time without everything grinding to a halt. That, he says, is what real freedom looks like for a business owner. This brings up a concept Derek is unusually candid about, one that most business books dance around awkwardly: the difference between being a creative founder and being a manager.
These are genuinely different skills, different temperaments, different sources of energy and meaning. Some people come alive in the startup phase, the invention, the building from nothing, the scrappy improvisation. Those same people often wither in the management phase, when the primary work shifts to running meetings, approving budgets, and handling HR processes. Derek was honest enough with himself to recognize which category he belonged to. He understood that keeping himself in a management role was making him miserable and making the company worse at the same time. So he made a decision that took real courage. He found a CEO who genuinely loved operations and management and gave that person full authority to run the company. This wasn't surrender or escape from responsibility. It was a clear-eyed recognition of what would make the company flourish and what would allow Derek to do his best work. The company improved after this decision. Employees were happier because they were working with someone who loved what they were doing. And Derek got his freedom back. The freedom to think, create, travel, and eventually write the very book we're discussing. But not everything in CD Baby's story went smoothly. Derek recounts with painful honesty a period when he had stepped back from day-to-day involvement, and things began to drift. There was no dramatic betrayal, no grand scandal, just a slow accumulation of small decisions made by well-meaning people who didn't fully understand the deeper values and intentions that had shaped the company. Each individual decision seemed reasonable in isolation. Together, they gradually changed the character of what he'd built. The lesson here is one that many founders discover the hard way. Delegation is not the same as disappearance. Stepping back from daily operations doesn't mean disconnecting from what matters most about what you've built. Now, let's sit with one of the most philosophically interesting arguments in the book. Derek talks openly about two fundamentally different types of people in business. The first type builds a company to sell it. They see a business the way a real estate developer sees a building, something to construct, improve, and eventually sell for a profit, then move on to the next project. The second type builds a company to live in it. They see the business as an expression of their values, a vehicle for serving people they care about, a space where meaningful work gets done. Neither approach is wrong, but the catastrophic mistake, Derek says, is building with one approach in mind while secretly wanting the other. This internal contradiction is responsible for a massive amount of suffering and failure in the entrepreneurial world. Derek is refreshingly honest that he wasn't entirely clear about which type he was when he started. He built CD Baby and lived inside it for years, then eventually decided to sell. And when he sold, he donated all the proceeds to charity rather than keeping them. Why? Because he genuinely believed that money beyond what he needed for a good life would become a burden rather than a benefit. This position might seem strange or even suspicious to some people, but it's completely consistent with the philosophy running through the entire book. Know what you actually want. Build your life around that. And don't let impressive numbers trick you into forgetting what you were chasing in the first place. Derek then turns his attention to one of the most underestimated forces in business, company culture. The conventional wisdom is that culture lives in the values posted on office walls, in team building retreats, in the language of mission statements. Derek disagrees fundamentally. He says company culture is built entirely through small, daily decisions. How do you treat an angry customer? How do you respond when an employee makes a mistake? What do you do when you find a way to cut costs that would subtly hurt the customer experience? These small decisions, made consistently over years, are what actually create the culture. Everything else is decoration. He offers a concrete illustration of this. Whenever he faced a technical problem that could be fixed quickly with a simple patch, or fixed properly with a deeper rebuild, he always chose the deeper rebuild, even when it took much longer. This consistent choice, made hundreds of times over years, is what built CD Baby's reputation as a site that musicians could trust. There were no press releases announcing it, no marketing campaigns celebrating it. The trustworthiness was visible in the product itself, and it turned into word-of-mouth growth that no advertising budget could have purchased. This commitment to genuine care connects to what Derek considers one of the most powerful competitive advantages available to any small business:
actually caring. In a world where most large companies have optimized caring out of their processes in favor of efficiency and scale, a small company that genuinely, visibly cares about the people it serves stands out dramatically. And this caring has to be real, not performed. When CD Baby employees responded to musician emails, the response felt like a human being talking to another human being, not a corporate template, not a scripted apology, but an actual person engaging with an actual situation. That feeling, multiplied across thousands of interactions, was the invisible engine of the company's growth. Connected to this is what Derek calls following the desires of your potential customers. Instead of spending enormous energy on market research and demographic analysis and trend forecasting, he found it often more accurate and effective to simply listen carefully to the people who were already showing up. CD Baby didn't build most of its features based on strategic planning. It built them in response to specific requests from real musicians who needed specific things. A musician asked for a feature, Derek thought it made sense, built it, and discovered that hundreds of other musicians wanted the exact same thing. This way of building keeps everything grounded in real need rather than theoretical demand. But Derek is quick to add an important qualification. Following your customers doesn't mean doing whatever any individual customer asks. Sometimes a specific customer will request something that would harm other customers or undermine the integrity of what you've built. In those moments, you need the courage to say no, even when saying yes would be easier. The principle he operated by was simple. Does this decision serve my customers as a whole, and does it serve the spirit of what this company is about? If the answer to either question is no, then no is the right answer, even if it disappoints someone in the short term.
Let's talk about competition, because Derek's stance on it is one of the most liberating ideas in the book. He says, stop watching your competitors, not because they don't exist, but because the time and mental energy you spend monitoring them and trying to outmaneuver them is time stolen from building something genuinely original. When you're busy looking at what others are doing, you lose the ability to see clearly what you want to do. The only competition worth your energy is with yourself. Am I better than I was last month? Is my work serving my customers better than it was 6 months ago? This stance on competition connects directly to the book's emphasis on originality. The most powerful competitive advantage you can have is authenticity, building something that genuinely reflects your values, your personality, your specific vision for how things should work. When what you build is truly yours, you become impossible to compare with anyone else, because you're the only person who can be you. The moment you start trying to be a better version of someone else or copy a successful model you've seen elsewhere, you're playing in someone else's arena and you're permanently the second best player. There's a passage in the book about the loneliness of being a business owner that feels rare and important in the literature of entrepreneurship. Derek describes moments of intense pressure where there was no one around who truly understood what he was going through. Friends couldn't quite grasp what it meant to be responsible for employee salaries and customer expectations and the survival of something you'd built from nothing. Family worried but didn't have the vocabulary for the specific challenges involved. This loneliness is real and it's hard, Derek says honestly. But he follows that admission with something crucial. This loneliness is the price of independence. If you genuinely want to be self-directed and autonomous, this is part of what that costs.
What helps, he suggests, is building a community of people going through similar experiences, not to get ready-made answers, but simply to feel less alone. Reading extensively about other entrepreneurs' journeys helps too, not to copy their strategies, but to internalize the fact that the difficulties you're facing are human difficulties, not evidence of your personal failure. The challenges that feel uniquely crushing are usually the same challenges everyone who has built something real has wrestled with.
That awareness doesn't make them easier, but it makes them survivable. The book addresses the topic of pricing with a bluntness that's genuinely refreshing. Derek says that if you're embarrassed by the price you're charging, it means one of two things. Either your price genuinely doesn't reflect real value, or you don't sufficiently believe in the value you're delivering. The solution in both cases is the same. Either develop what you offer until you believe in it fully, or study your market properly and price in a way that reflects honest value. But don't lower your price as an escape from confronting the truth. A business operating on razor-thin margins has no room to invest in quality and improvement, and ultimately that serves no one, least of all the customers you're trying to help. On the subject of partnerships, Derek is careful and somewhat cautionary. Partnerships in business, he observes, are like marriages in many ways, and they share many of the same failure modes: misaligned visions, unspoken expectations, disagreements about decision-making authority, resentment built up over small frustrations. This doesn't mean partnerships are always bad, but they require extraordinary clarity from the beginning about roles, authority structures, and how disagreements will be resolved. His general advice is, if you can start alone, do. Add partners only when there's a genuine, specific reason that can't be worked around. The default toward partnership in startup culture often creates more problems than it solves. Derek returns throughout the book to the relationship between freedom and responsibility in a way that challenges a common fantasy about entrepreneurship. Many people start their own business dreaming of immediate freedom. No boss, no schedule, no one telling you what to do. The reality, especially in the early years, is almost exactly the opposite. You're more constrained than ever because you're responsible for your customers, for quality, for meeting your own standards. Real freedom, the kind where you genuinely control how you spend your time and what you work on, doesn't arrive on day one. It arrives after years of building the right systems and the right people around you. But the freedom that comes after years of building something that can run without you, that, he says, is one of the most beautiful kinds of freedom there is, because it's earned freedom, not inherited luck. When you reach the point where you can choose how to spend your day and know that choice came from years of work and learning and persistence, that freedom has a completely different quality than anything that could have been handed to you. Derek also makes an important and often overlooked point about the difference between working in your business and working on your business. Most business owners, especially in the early stages, spend nearly all their time in operational mode, handling the daily tasks, solving the immediate problems, keeping everything running. This is necessary, but it can become a trap. You can spend years running full speed on the treadmill of daily operations and never look up to ask whether the treadmill is pointed in the right direction. Protecting dedicated time for strategic, big-picture thinking is not a luxury for when things calm down. Things will not calm down. You have to carve out that thinking time deliberately and treat it as sacred as any other appointment.
There's a quietly radical idea woven through the book about the relationship between fame and success. In the current cultural moment, we tend to conflate the two. Success looks like millions of followers and speaking invitations and magazine profiles. Derek was well known in certain circles, but never a mainstream celebrity, and he preferred it that way. He expresses concern in the book about the moment when the reputation of a company or a person becomes larger than the actual value being delivered. When that happens, you start making decisions to protect and maintain the image rather than to improve the substance. And the image becomes a cage rather than a platform. This observation resonates deeply in an era where building a personal brand has become standard advice. Derek isn't saying it's wrong to be known for what you do. He's asking a more specific question. Are you building something real that genuinely deserves the attention, or are you building the attention first and hoping the substance will follow? In his view, the order matters enormously. Build something that creates real value for real people first. The appropriate recognition will follow naturally. Reverse that sequence, and you're on a much more fragile foundation. The book also touches honestly on the psychological and emotional dimensions of building something, territory that most business writing studiously avoids. Derek acknowledges going through genuinely difficult periods during the years of building CD Baby. Times of exhaustion, doubt, regret about decisions, a blurred line between personal life and work. He admits that not paying more attention to these dimensions was a mistake, and that he would make different choices if he were starting over. He says, "If I were doing it again, I would draw clearer lines around work time and personal time, regardless of pressure. I would treat my own mental and physical well-being as a business-critical resource rather than an optional luxury, because an exhausted person cannot serve customers well, cannot make clear decisions, cannot be present for the people they love outside of work. Taking care of yourself is not separate from taking care of your business. It is the foundation on which everything else rests." Now let's come to what is perhaps the most philosophically rich idea in the entire book, and the one that stays with you longest after you put it down. Derek talks about the concept of enough, not as a limitation or a settling, but as a deliberate, self-aware relationship with what you're building and how big you want it to become. Everything has a natural, appropriate size. Some things are beautiful precisely because they're small. Some things need to be large to fulfill their purpose. The challenge is knowing which kind of thing you're building and having the discipline to stop at the right size, rather than succumbing to the cultural pressure that more is always better. He offers a thought experiment that sticks. Imagine a beloved small restaurant with a specific, irreplaceable atmosphere, food that carries the fingerprint of one particular chef, a feeling of intimacy that makes regulars feel like they belong there. The owner decides to franchise and open in 20 cities. The atmosphere dilutes, the consistency suffers. What made it special was the specific, personal, unrepeatable nature of the original. Turning it into a chain didn't grow what was valuable. It dissolved it into something that reaches more people, but gives each of them less of the thing that made it worth visiting in the first place. Derek says, that's not success. That's trading something rare for something ordinary at a larger scale. The question he leaves you with, implicitly but unmistakably, is, what is the right size for what you're building? And do you have the courage to stop there, even when the culture and the metrics and the people around you are all telling you to keep growing? Toward the end of the book, Derek discusses how to know when it's time to sell or let go of something you've built. His answer is counterintuitive, but once you hear it, feels obviously right. He says, the moment you start thinking about selling, you're probably ready to sell, because the person who is deeply in love with what they've built doesn't think about selling. They think about improving, expanding, evolving. When the work starts to feel more like a burden than a source of energy, when you find yourself maintaining something rather than building something, that's a signal that your relationship with what you've created has fundamentally changed. He's careful to add that selling is not failure. Sometimes the most generous and intelligent thing you can do with something you've built is hand it to someone else who will take it further than you could. The difference between wisdom and weakness here is whether you're letting go from a place of clarity and readiness, or clinging from a place of fear about what your identity will be without this thing you built. The first is healthy completion. The second is the kind of trap that keeps founders tied to companies long past the point where either party is truly benefiting. And this brings us back to the question that started everything. What do you want? Derek returns to this question repeatedly throughout the book, not because he's being repetitive, but because he knows how easy it is to lose sight of the answer in the middle of building something. The day-to-day demands of a growing business have a way of consuming you so completely that you forget, for months at a time, why you started in the first place. The answer to what do you want needs to be something you come back to regularly, something you test your decisions against, something you use as a compass when the pressure of the immediate makes it hard to see clearly. Throughout anything you want, Derek Sivers makes a case for a different kind of entrepreneurship. Smaller, slower, more honest, more human, more aligned with what actually makes life worth living. He's not arguing that everyone should build a small company, or that ambition is bad, or that financial success doesn't matter.
He's arguing that none of those things mean much if the structure of your work is taking you further from the life you actually want to be living.
The final idea I want to leave you with from this book is what Derek says about permission. He observes that so many people are waiting for the right moment, the right resources, the right circumstances, the right person to tell them their idea is good, waiting essentially for permission to begin. And his message is direct. You already have the permission. Not tomorrow, not when you've saved more money, not when your children are older or your circumstances are more stable. Now, today, with what you have. Starting imperfectly and small is infinitely better than not starting, because the person who starts, no matter how clumsily, is building real knowledge and real momentum. The person who waits for perfect conditions is building only more elaborate reasons to keep waiting. Derek built CD Baby without permission. He didn't ask anyone whether it was a good idea. He didn't wait for the industry to invite him in. He had a problem, he built a solution, and he kept showing up to serve the people who needed it. That's the whole secret, stated plainly. You already have what you need to begin. The only question is whether you'll use it. So let me ask you directly, before you close this, what is the one thing you've been wanting to build or start or create that you've been waiting to begin? What is the specific excuse that's been keeping you in the waiting room? And what would you do today, not next month, not next year, today, if you accepted that you already have permission? Sit with that question. It might be the most important one you've asked yourself in a while. There's another dimension of this book that deserves its own extended treatment, and that's Derek's philosophy around business models and how they shape the soul of what you build. He makes an observation that sounds almost too simple to be profound. The way you make money determines who you serve, and who you serve determines who you become. CD Baby's model was straightforward. Musicians paid a small setup fee, and CD Baby kept a percentage of each sale. That structure meant Derek's financial interests were perfectly aligned with the musician's success. When they sold more music, everyone did better. There was no tension between what was good for the customer and what was good for the company. He argues this alignment is not a nice-to-have. It's the foundation of a sustainable, ethical business. Compare this to a business model built on advertising, where the revenue comes not from the people using the product, but from third parties trying to reach those users. In that model, the users are not the customers. They are the product being sold to the real customers, the advertisers. Derek doesn't belabor this point, but the implication is clear. Choose a business model where the people you want to serve are also the people paying you. That alignment keeps everything honest. It keeps your incentives pointed in the same direction as your values. And it makes every decision simpler, because you can always ask, does this make things better for the people who are paying us? If yes, do it. If no, don't. This clarity of incentive structure is also why Derek was skeptical of chasing growth metrics that didn't translate to actual value for musicians. Page views, registered accounts, email list subscribers, these numbers can be gamed and inflated and made to look impressive without any of them meaning that the people you built this for are actually better off. He preferred to measure things that mattered directly to musicians. Are they selling more music? Are they reaching more fans? Are they getting paid reliably and fairly? Those were the numbers that told him whether the business was actually working or just appearing to work. Let's spend some time on one of the most counterintuitive ideas in the entire book, which is Derek's position on mistakes and imperfection. In most business writing, mistakes are something to be minimized, contained, apologized for, and learned from only reluctantly. Derek flips this completely. He says that building something real means making constant, embarrassing, expensive mistakes, and not just tolerating that fact, but genuinely embracing it. Because the alternative, trying so hard to avoid mistakes that you only do safe, predictable things, is itself the biggest mistake of all. He describes specific decisions at CD Baby that cost money and caused problems. Hiring the wrong people, building features nobody wanted, handling situations clumsily that a more experienced operator would have navigated smoothly.
He doesn't present these as war stories that make him look brave in retrospect. He presents them as evidence that being willing to make mistakes is the only way to build real expertise. You cannot learn how to make good decisions by reading about how to make good decisions. You learn by making decisions, seeing what happens, adjusting, and making more decisions. The accumulated scar tissue from 100 small failures is worth more than any business school curriculum. What's particularly insightful is his observation that the mistakes you regret most are not the ones where you tried something and it didn't work. The mistakes you regret most are the ones where you played it safe and didn't try. He says, "I've never met someone who lay on their deathbed wishing they had taken fewer risks, but I've met plenty of people who wish they had taken more." The asymmetry matters. A mistake from action can teach you something and often be corrected. A mistake from inaction, an opportunity not seized, a thing not built, a risk not taken, those tend to just disappear into the silence of what might have been. Derek is also unusually thoughtful about the role that vision plays in sustaining long-term effort. He distinguishes between two types of motivation: extrinsic motivation, which is the desire for external rewards like money, status, and praise, and intrinsic motivation, which is the drive that comes from the work itself, from caring about the problem, from genuine interest in the craft, from the satisfaction of building something you believe in. He argues that extrinsic motivation is real and useful, but it's not enough to carry you through the truly hard periods, the stretches when things aren't working and the rewards feel far away, and the easier path keeps beckoning. What gets you through those periods is intrinsic motivation, the fact that you care about this thing beyond what you'll get from it. This is why he insists so firmly that you build around what you actually care about, not what seems lucrative or what's trending or what an advisor told you has a large addressable market, what you genuinely, personally, specifically care about. Because only that kind of caring survives the hard parts, and every meaningful thing you build will have hard parts, guaranteed. The question is only whether your motivation is strong enough to outlast them.
One of the chapters that rewards rereading is Derek's discussion of what he calls the infinite game of business versus the finite game. This concept, borrowed loosely from philosopher James Carse, distinguishes between games played to win and games played to keep playing. Finite games have a defined endpoint, a winner, a loser, a clear set of rules that everyone agrees to. Infinite games have no endpoint. The goal is simply to continue, to keep the game going, to keep building and learning and serving. Derek argues that most of the ways we talk about business treat it like a finite game. We're trying to win, to beat competitors, to reach an exit. But the entrepreneurs who build the most lasting and meaningful things are playing an infinite game. They're not trying to win. They're trying to keep doing what they love, keep serving who they love, and keep the whole thing alive and growing as long as it serves a real purpose. This perspective changes how you respond to setbacks. If you're playing a finite game and you lose a round, you're closer to being eliminated. If you're playing an infinite game and you encounter a setback, it's just a lesson that helps you play better in the next round. It also changes how you respond to winning. If a competitor closes or a rival company fails, a finite game player celebrates. An infinite game player barely notices because their attention is on their own game, not someone else's. Derek weaves through the book a thread about the specific texture of customer relationships that he built at CD Baby, and it's worth slowing down and really absorbing this because it runs counter to so much conventional business wisdom. The conventional wisdom says, scale your customer service, automate what you can, use templates and chatbots and ticketing systems to handle volume efficiently. Derek took the opposite approach. He hired people who genuinely cared about music and musicians, gave them real latitude to handle situations as human beings rather than as process followers, and measured the quality of individual interactions rather than the speed at which tickets were closed.
The result was something that almost never happens in business. Customers who loved the company. Not just satisfied customers, not just loyal customers, but genuinely enthusiastic advocates who told every musician they knew about CD Baby. This kind of love cannot be manufactured through marketing. It can only be earned through thousands of small, real human moments where someone felt genuinely seen and helped. Derek says this was never a deliberate strategy.
It was just the natural result of hiring people who cared and giving them permission to express that caring. But looking back, he recognizes it as one of the most valuable things he ever built, because no competitor could copy it. You can copy features, you can copy pricing, you can copy marketing campaigns. You cannot copy genuine care. Let me bring in a thread that runs quietly through the book, but emerges very clearly if you're paying attention. Derek's relationship with simplicity. He consistently moved towards simpler solutions, simpler structures, simpler policies. When he could write a rule in one sentence, he didn't write a policy document. When a technology could be replaced with a human conversation, he often chose the conversation. When a process could be eliminated rather than optimized, he eliminated it. This isn't laziness. It's a deep belief that complexity is the enemy of clarity, and clarity is the lifeblood of good decisions and good culture. He tells a story about a pricing decision at CD Baby that illustrates this beautifully. He was faced with the option of creating a tiered pricing system, different rates for different categories of musicians, different features at different price points, a more sophisticated model that would theoretically maximize revenue. He chose instead to keep a single, flat, simple fee structure. Yes, he probably left some money on the table, but he gained something more valuable. Every musician who used the site could immediately understand what they were paying and what they were getting. There was no small print, no hidden tiers, no feeling of being maneuvered into a higher package. That simplicity built trust, and trust over a long enough timeline is worth more than any revenue optimization.
This instinct towards simplicity also shows up in how Derek managed decisions inside the company. Rather than creating elaborate decision trees or complex approval processes, he tried to articulate the underlying principle in the simplest possible terms and then trust his team to apply that principle to new situations. If you have to ask whether something is okay, ask yourself, would a reasonable musician who uses our service consider this fair and caring? If yes, do it. If you're unsure, check with someone who knows the company's values well. That's it. Not a 20-page policy manual, a single question that contains everything. There's a fascinating passage in the book where Derek reflects on the nature of success and what it actually feels like from the inside. From the outside, CD Baby looked like a huge success by the time he sold it. Hundreds of thousands of musicians, millions of dollars in sales, a recognizable name in the independent music world. But he's honest about the fact that for much of that journey, it didn't feel like success. It felt like problems, an endless, evolving series of problems that demanded his attention and judgment. He says this not to complain, but to prepare you. If you're waiting for the moment when you'll feel successful and everything will click into place and the struggle will be over, that moment is not coming. The successful people aren't the ones who stopped struggling. They're the ones who found a struggle they found meaningful enough to keep showing up for. This connects to something he says about the difference between chasing success and building meaning. Success, in the external sense, is an outcome you can't fully control. You can make good decisions, serve your customers well, work with integrity, and still face circumstances that prevent the conventional markers of success from materializing. Meaning, on the other hand, is something you construct through your choices every day. When you build something you genuinely believe in, for people you genuinely care about, in a way that aligns with your values, the meaning is present in the doing, not waiting at the finish line. That shift from orienting around success to orienting around meaning is one of the most important reframes this book offers.
Let's talk about something Derek addresses with unusual directness: what to do when your business stops serving the life you want. He describes a point in his CD Baby journey when the company had grown to a size where it was clearly succeeding by every external metric, but he found himself less happy, less free, and less creatively alive than he had been years earlier when the company was small and scrappy. The thing he'd built to create freedom had become its own kind of constraint. He found himself making decisions based on what would protect the company rather than what he actually wanted to do. The honest acknowledgement of this dynamic is one of the book's most valuable contributions. It punctures the narrative that more success automatically means more fulfillment. Sometimes success, if you're not deliberate about it, creates its own prison. The key is catching this dynamic early enough, before you've built an identity so wrapped up in the company that you can't imagine life beyond it. Derek caught it, eventually made the structural changes needed, including finding a CEO and creating real separation between himself and the daily operations, and gradually reclaimed the quality of life and work that had motivated him to build in the first place. What Derek ultimately built at CD Baby was less a music distribution company and more a proof of concept, a living demonstration that you could build something valuable, treat people well, stay true to your values, grow without outside capital, and eventually create a life of genuine freedom. Not the freedom of the Instagram entrepreneur selling courses about freedom from a beach in Bali. The real, earned, daily freedom of knowing that what you built serves people authentically, runs without your constant intervention, and reflects who you actually are.
The book is short. You can read it in an afternoon. But its ideas have a way of continuing to work on you long after you've finished. The questions it plants don't resolve quickly. What do I want? Am I building something that serves that, or something that's pulling me away from it? Am I doing this for the right reasons, or am I chasing something that won't satisfy me when I get there? These are not comfortable questions, but they're the questions that determine whether the years you put into building something will feel, at the end, like time well spent. Derek Sivers is not telling you what to build or how to build it. He's offering something rarer, an honest account of what it actually felt like to build something real, from the first customer to the final sale, including the parts that were genuinely hard and the parts he got wrong. And wrapped inside that honesty is a quiet, persistent invitation to take your own path seriously, to stop looking for a model to replicate, to stop waiting for someone to validate your direction, to start with what you actually care about, build the smallest possible version of it, find out if it helps anyone, and go from there. That's the whole book. That's anything you want. It starts with knowing what you want, and then it starts again every day with choosing it. Before we wrap up entirely, I want to revisit one more idea from the book that I think often gets overlooked in summaries because it sounds too philosophical to be practical. It's Derek's thinking on the relationship between constraints and creativity. There's a common belief that creativity flourishes with maximum freedom, unlimited resources, unlimited time, unlimited options. Derek's experience was the opposite. The constraints he operated under at CD Baby, no outside capital, limited team, the need to generate revenue from day one, forced him to find solutions that were simpler, more elegant, and more directly useful than what he might have built with unlimited resources.
He makes the point that constraints force you to ask a more useful question. Instead of, what's the best possible solution to this problem, you're forced to ask, what's the best solution I can build with what I have right now? That second question generates answers that are real and implementable, rather than theoretical and distant. And very often, those constraint solutions end up being better than the lavish alternatives would have been. Because simplicity almost always serves users better than complexity, and constraints are the engine of simplicity. This applies not just to resources, but to focus. When you can't do everything, you're forced to choose what matters most. And that forced prioritization, choosing one thing over another when you'd rather do both, is where your real values get revealed. Not in what you say you believe, but in what you choose when you can't have everything. Derek's constraints forced him to continually clarify what CD Baby was really about at its core, and that clarity is a large part of what made the company coherent and trustworthy to the people who used it. The last thought I'll share from this book brings everything full circle. Derek ends with a sentiment that's easy to dismiss as a platitude, but is worth sitting with. The real purpose of a business isn't to make money. Making money is the result of doing the right things. The real purpose is to make something you're genuinely proud of, that helps real people in ways they value, in a way that lets you live the life you want. If those three things are in place, the money tends to follow. If those three things aren't in place, the money, even when it comes, doesn't fill the hole. He says this not as someone who is indifferent to money. He says it as someone who had plenty of it and gave it away.
not out of sainthood, but out of genuine conviction that beyond a certain point, more money was solving a problem he didn't have, while potentially creating new problems he didn't want. What he wanted was what he'd had in the early years of CD Baby: meaningful work, genuine connection with a community he cared about, and the freedom to shape his own days. The company he built was the vehicle for those things. When it grew to the point where it started undermining rather than enabling those things, the rational response was to let it go. That's a story worth carrying with you. Whatever you're building or thinking about building, however large or small, however ambitious or modest, the question is always the same. Is this vehicle taking me toward the life I want, or is it becoming its own destination? Keep asking that, keep answering honestly, and build accordingly. If this summary resonated with you, the best thing you can do isn't to like the video or subscribe, though those things help. The best thing you can do is take one idea from this book and let it change one decision you make this week. Maybe it's getting clearer on what you actually want before you keep building. Maybe it's finding your first paying customer instead of spending more time on a business plan. Maybe it's documenting a recurring problem in your work so it stops costing you the same energy every time. Small applications of real ideas are how books actually change lives. Everything else is just entertainment.